Hi, everyone. Welcome to Comm Lead Reconnects. I'll introduce the event in just 1 minute, but I already am seeing that many of you are joining us, and we'll wait just another minute for everyone to join us. But at that time, please make sure to introduce yourselves in the chat. Our chat will be our active community space for your thoughts, reactions, and a way to connect with one another. So introduce to us where you're joining us from. If you see anyone that are mentioning their cohorts, those are probably our graduate students of our program. And so welcome again. We'll just start in just 1 second. I know that a lot of people are joining us right now. Very quickly, welcome to Comm Lead Reconnects. This is an annual production of the Communication Leadership Graduate Program at the University of Washington. This is our annual public learning event. And this year we did a series of events, and I'll talk to you a little bit about our intention this year. So thank you for joining us today. We're joined by, again, a number of our community members, graduate students, alumni, and faculty of our program, but also professionals across fields and across contexts and all around the world. So welcome to all of you. Again, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. And I'm Ikin Yashin. I'm the Director of Communication Leadership Program. And I'll be joined by our program's co-founder, Hansen Hussein, facilitating today's conversation. Very briefly about our program, Comm Lead Reconnects this year was a direct reaction to the transformed world we find ourselves in. So we've had a three-part conversation with a number of key individuals and very thoughtful conversations that are trying to kind of prepare us what comes next and to make sense of the moment that we're in. So this is the final part of that series, although all events, of course, were standalone. And we're ending with a conversation that is really valuable for us in this moment and was actually the inspiration of the overall theme. From the get-go, we were very much concerned, thinking about and thinking with our community about how to make sense of this moment and how to move forward collectively. Along the way, just as a quick introduction to today's event, Hansen will introduce Mia in just a minute, but Mia Birdsong's book was actually an inspiration for our overall conversation. We tried to read collectively as staff and faculty of our graduate program, and this was a book we read earlier this year that really actually made us think about how we show up in a very challenging moment for a lot of different reasons. And it was one of my favorite books this year. I quote it all the time, and I'm thinking with it, and I'll be teaching with it in just a few weeks as well. So I'm thrilled to be able to hear thoughts about it and to also have a conversation today about how to reclaim our communities and in this moment. So just also a reminder very quickly, for those of you joining us, again, upon completion of this series and watching them as well, we're of course sharing with you a very exciting opportunity. Those who participate or watch our series and also complete a few questions, reflection questions for us, will be able to be eligible for a micro-credential through University of Washington. And you can see what our digital badge will look like. So you'll be able to receive that. We'll get in touch with you after the completion of this event with directions. As always, today, the end of the session will be a breakout conversation amongst yourselves, the community that joins us today. And those questions are very much the inspiration for the types of questions that will qualify you for this micro-credential that we're really excited to offer, first of its kind, actually, at our university in this way. And because we're offering a micro-credential, as with all our events, this event is very much inspired by learning and learning together. So I just want to share with you when we were designing these events, we had intentions about what we want to learn, and that those intentions are there today as well. In the company of Mia Birdsong, we really want to have a thoughtful conversation about that will help us understand the necessity of prioritizing communities, especially through the transformative lens of this moment, and learn about how to form and energize communities as well in this moment, and then identify barriers to deep connection and intimacy in our world, and identify types of impact that the pandemic and ongoing systemic racism have on our communities. All of these are, of course, really big tasks and really important learnings. And all of these actually learnings are in the book. In just 1 minute, I'll turn it over to Hanson to introduce our very exciting guest today. Also a reminder that for those of you who may be interested, we have live captioning of our event available to all of you. So feel free to turn that on. And thank you very much for joining us today. So I'll turn it over to Hanson to introduce our guest today.
Thanks very much, Akin, and thank you for laying out this incredible learning journey we've been all for the last 3 weeks, and to culminate with me is just a great way to end it. And I think, Mia, you'd be very pleased to hear that we don't call ourselves just a graduate program, but we've long called ourselves a learning community. It's just not about the students and the faculty and our alumni, but it's about everybody we engage, especially in these public sessions such as this. And anybody who connects with us this way is part of our community, and we take that very seriously. So I'd like to formally introduce Mia. And I love the first line from her bio, so I'm just going to read it literally. Mia Birdsong is an author, activist, and facilitator who steadily, I love that word, engages the leadership and wisdom of people experiencing injustice to chart new visions of American life. As you heard from Mia, from Akin, Mia came to our attention through her 2020 book, How We Show Up, Reclaiming Family, Friendship, and Community. And what Akin and I most appreciated about Mia's work was how she truly reclaims the power of community. We use that word so often, community, and Mia just really delves into it and really explains where we can leverage this to truly do good and reimagine our future. And she reimagines that power in creating the future that we want. And what I also like is that apparently all three of us here are science fiction geeks. So Mia is also a creator and host of the podcast More Than Enough from the Nation, which expands the current guaranteed income movement by tapping into the voices and visions of low-income people. And she's a senior fellow of the Economic Security Project. Mia, welcome.
Thank you. So excited to be here with you all.
We're really pleased to have you. In the closing chapter of your book, there's a really great line. You say, massive change is happening, and it will be inevitably increasingly hard and painful. And many of us will get lost along the way. The only protection against the worst case scenario is also in community. That line presages the moment we're all experiencing. It feels like a worst case scenario in different ways. How would you apply, or how should we apply the learnings and premise of your book and your perspective to what's happening right now?
Oh, that's a huge question.
We can break it down if it makes it any easier.
I mean, I think, you know, this last year has really revealed a lot of things that have been people's lived experience for a long time. So I think about, you know, the folks in our communities who are disabled, who have been, you know, doing their own version of sheltering at home most of their lives, or who have been wearing masks because they have compromised immune systems and can't go out anyway, who have needed to work from home because they have limited mobility. So there's this way in which many of us are now experiencing some of the things that they've been experiencing for a long time. The last year has also revealed, you know, has made economic injustice a lived reality for way more people, because people, you know, unemployment has skyrocketed, hours have been cut back, a lot of the work that many of us were doing is not possible, because it requires being in person. So I think a greater swath of America is experiencing economic injustice, which many people have kind of wrestled with for their whole lives. You know, racial justice has been an ongoing theme this year. And I think a lot more white folks have been somehow like really tapped it, like George Floyd's murder, the murder of several other Black folks last summer, wasn't that different from, what we've been witnessing since people started filming, police brutality. But there was something about it happening during the pandemic that really made it more tangible and relevant to really to more white folks. So what we've experienced has been kind of a concentration of what a lot of folks in America have, been wrestling with, been dealing with, been navigating for their lifetimes. So I think that the lessons of the book are really the same. They made us be more kind of pointed and relevant during the last year.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. And I like that thought of concentration and also acceleration. A lot of the changes that I think you would like to see maybe might be able to happen now because we've been able to be so focused on the reality of our existence right now. And one thing that really resonates for me, and it's something that I've spoken about a lot, but not in the detail you have, which I think is very helpful, is this idea that there's also an opportunity now that we really understand what's going on to renegotiate our social contracts. You talk about what America has been like, toxic individualism or American dreamism. What does that really mean then to renegotiate our social contract? What could it look like? How could we be different?
So, kind of from a institutional, systemic government perspective, I think that we really need to resist the comfort in the idea of returning to normal, because part of what that kind of concentration of the pandemic revealed is that for a whole lot of people, like, normal was really shitty. So returning to that is not actually going to make things better for them. So I think we have this for example, like, the conversation that I've been in with a bunch of other people around guaranteed income for the last 5 years, really like elevated during the pandemic. And if you had said to me that the country would be seriously talking about it, if you said that to me 2 years ago, I would have been like, I don't know what you're talking about. But all of a sudden, because of the kind of economic disaster that the pandemic created, we're talking about guaranteed income. So I think there's this moment for us to think about, like, what are the things that a human being needs to live a life of well-being, right? We need, in the context of capitalism, we need money, we need housing, we need food. These are basic human rights. And all of us actually deserve those things. And we have a moment here where we can be like, okay, so let's actually solve poverty. Let's solve homelessness. Let's solve our crappy healthcare system, which, again, another thing that's been deeply revealed to a lot of us is how inadequate our healthcare system is. So we have a moment to really be like the social contract is that our institutions, our government, anybody who is in a position of power, like, owes us our basic human rights. And then we have a responsibility to engage with those systems to ensure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's like, voting for sure, but it goes way beyond that. I think we really need to think about what civic engagement means for each of us. So that's kind of at the macro level.
When you describe, oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, on the more kind of community and individual level, I think that I kind of think about, like, for myself, if I'm trying to renegotiate, like, the social contract that I have with other people in my community, if I'm trying to kind of excavate the ways in which I've been socialized toward toxic individualism and American dreamism, then I think about both, like, my behaviors and the re-socialization that I need to do around the things that I actually believe deeply, right? So I can believe something intellectually, but know that part of my socialization really has me kind of behaving in conflict with my values. So behavior change can come before I do the deep work of changing my belief systems. And that comes from like having rules or guidelines for myself that align with the values that I want to hold. So, I think we ask ourselves, like, if I'm trying to reject toxic individualism, then I have to ask myself, what would deeper connection look like for me? Or what could it look like? What are the things that would counter toxic individualism in my life? Do I need to say yes to help more often? Or do I need to ask for help? Do I need to be more transparent with the people in my life about something that I'm struggling with? And I can do those things as behavior changes. One of the most powerful experiences that I've had during the pandemic is I have a friend, and they live by themselves. They are managing a lot of health issues. And I don't know when it was, probably in the fall, they texted me, and with lots of like preamble, said they're really trying to address the health issues they're wrestling with. And they asked if I would occasionally cook for them. Now, this dude like has run shit. This is a person who like gets things done. And I know it was incredibly uncomfortable for them to ask me to cook for them, right? Like that seems like a big deal. But they realized that they are not going to get better without support. And they realized that I'm somebody who's invested in their well-being. And so I of course said yes. And I delight in it. I love that it gives me a way to like love up this person when I can't hang out with them. I get to like tap into a thing that I really love to do, right? I love to cook, and frankly, that I'm doing anyway, right? And it's like every time I cook a meal for them, I cook a meal for them every weekend. And it's like, and I'm cooking for I live with my husband and two kids. Like I'm cooking for my family, and I get to like, it's like they're at the table with us. I get to cook for them as part of my family. So I have, I cook usually on Saturday, and then on Sundays, I usually deliver the meal for them, and I text them and tell them what it is. And then I get feedback about it. Sometimes I have them like pick out recipes. So this experience of being able to like this person asking me to help them in such an intimate way, I know benefits them, right? They are super appreciative of it. It helps them not have to think about, what they're doing in terms of nutrition. But for me, like it is one of my favorite things. And I think we often forget what a gift it is for the people who love us to be given an opportunity to help us, to support us. So that's something I feel like really pushes back against toxic individualism, and that's behavior change, right? So, and then there's the personal work. Then there is the fact that like we would love to, it'd be great if we understood something intellectually and that was enough. But we really, we hold our socialization really deeply in our hearts and our spirits and our bodies, and that work takes longer. So for example, if you're socialized in America, you're taught to believe that your value as a human being is something that you have to demonstrate it, right? Hard work is how you earn your deservedness, right? Of, things like food and shelter and whatever. And that is some capitalist, white supremacist garbage. And I reject it intellectually, but I know that it shows up in me in the ways in which I continue to, make my calendar be too full, or feel like a little wave of shame for not meeting a deadline, or whatever it is. And we all have these ways in which the socialization that we've gotten around American dreamism, around toxic individualism show up for us. And we just really have to continue to acknowledge those things and recognize it, and then do the personal work, whatever healing work we need to do in whatever modalities we use, ideally with other people, to move ourselves away, to re-socialize ourselves, to many ways to reparent ourselves, so that we're not holding those things in our hearts.
And something that builds from that, and I'm also reading the comments, thanks to all our attendees. I think a common sense sentiment, and Camille in the comments also shares that, is we don't want to go back to a normal that and the way we were doing things, but we want to emerge into a new normal in this moment. So what you're sharing is really important in kind of targeting and creating a new vision that counters this experience of toxic individualism that we all experienced or partook in some sense until now in concrete ways, or tried to battle but couldn't because it was so systemic. So I want to build on what Hanson started with, but ask you about that social work, of what we can do for that new normal. For example, in the comments, Molly talked about how your friend had the courage to ask. And I think one of the things that I really, really appreciated in your book, amongst many, many things, was how it made me think about my own relationships. It allowed me to assess my own socialization and ask critical questions and then create a vision for the future. And one of the things that really helped me was your articulation about around friendship, and family and chosen family, all sorts of bonds and new vision, that I think was really clear. And I would like you to elaborate on it a little bit more, and particularly as it pertains to, you say, you talk in the book a little bit about and share examples about communities and individuals who actually do a good job of articulating a vision for their relationship, or making their expectations clear. Now, that sounds, when I say it, like something we all should do, but I have assessed myself, and I actually do not do that with some of the core people in my life. I've sparsely did that. So can you share some examples for us to maybe model that work that we can do in this new
Sure.
cycle?
And I want to say, like, I think in some ways, in writing about that, I wanted to push us to toward intention, right? Because one of the things that happens specifically around friendship is that our models for friendship are suggest that, like, you don't actually have conversations about like what we mean to each other the way that you do with like a romantic or a sexual partner, or even with, like, in a job, right? If you have a job, like, you and your colleagues have articulated expectations for what each person's meant to be doing. In our romantic and sexual relationships, we were like, well, what is this? Right? We have a name for things as they evolve. You have conversations about like what you expect from the other person. And I think that, I don't know that, I certainly have not done that with all of my friends, but there are places where I feel like the people who are closest to me, especially the friends who I considered or wanted to consider chosen family, and I wanted to have a conversation about our mutual understanding of that. Invited a conversation about that, invited a conversation about like what that meant for us, what our expectations were. So, on the community level, the one of the communities that comes to mind that I write about in the book is a community called Homefulness, that is in East Oakland. And they are they've been created over the kind of course of probably 20 years, through the vision and kind of just practice of really survival practice of a group of people who have been kind of chronically unhoused and were trying to build something for themselves, like that helped them survive. Like, and Tiny, who is the person I know in that community, is really clear that like it wasn't about creating some kind of like alternate utopia. It really was about like not dying and figuring out how to deal with just like tremendous attack and oppression from government, from white supremacy, from patriarchy, from capitalism, and all of the mental health stuff that folks also have to deal with. And in that community, over the last 20 years, they have created just practices of, how they navigate conflict and harm, right? They don't call the cops when something happens. They have practices of transformative justice that they, they're not like, I don't know that people are like reading books about transformative justice. I think that's really like a practice that has evolved and really become a culture of the community that they're part of. They have a council of elders who helps to make decisions and do some of the navigating around conflict and harm. And that when they think about who an elder is, they think about not just somebody who is an elder in terms of age, but someone who's an elder in terms of how long they've been part of the community. So Tiny's son, who is probably in their early 20s, has been part of this community for his whole life. So he is considered an elder because he's grown up in the community. And, I don't like the kind of nuance and details of it are not like nothing in the book is meant to be a blueprint, right? It's not meant to be like, here is how you do these, here's how this community does these things. And you should just like take these things and then apply them to your own lives. They're really meant to give us the models that we don't have, mostly so we know something else is possible. So I really think that the way that we figure out how to do these things with, when it comes to our friendships, for example, is with our friends. It's not like you go and you sit in your room and come up with like a list of practices or tenets that you want for your friendships. And then you share them with your friends. Like it really is a process of being in conversation with people. It is asking if folks are interested in clarifying what your expectations and roles are with each other. It's really like having those conversations. And I think that in a context where we are so often given prescriptive ways of addressing change in our lives, I really want us to understand that this is a process of remembering in a lot of ways, because all of us somewhere along the line come from people who lived in deep connected community. You may have to go back a few hundred years to find who those people are, but it exists. And it exists because that's who we fundamentally are as human beings. This is not just who we are like abstractly, it's who we are physiologically, right? Like human beings are social animals. We require each other. And American culture really counters that. So in many ways, I'm just asking us to be more of who we are. I'm asking us to be more human. And the stories in the book give us like little anchors and little kind of bright spots that we can look to as examples of what might be possible for us. But it really is a process that we need to engage in with the people in our lives. And frankly, like that's the like not knowing and the figuring it out with other people is like the fun part, because that's where we get to know each other. That's where we build intimacy in not just being in relationship with each other, but like actually understanding and talking about being in relationship with each other.
I'm so glad that you say that if there's no blueprint for this, and that resonated with our folks who are watching and commenting on the chat. It also does make me recall my own family. My dad's watching today, and he's originally from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. And I remember as a kid going back there, and there was no
bacon.
Oh, good. That's all right, Caribbean. And you probably know this, that it's okay just to go next door and drop in on people without warning them, right? And there was always expectation. You'd always get food. And I was just reading your book and I'm thinking, maybe we should create a how you show up app so people could say, hey, I'm open to drop-ins, but that puts the blueprint. That sounds terrible, right?
Don't do that.
But you're absolutely right that we have to be much more thoughtful and deliberate about how we do this. Anita mentioned an Atlantic article from last year, my colleague Anita, saying how there's this expanded terrain of friendship and thinking very differently about family and friends and what it really means to have a family. And that's what's so great about your book and redefining family and our relationships moving forward. So thank you very much for that. And no, we will not do an app about how to show up. We should just continue to drop in on friends and family.
Yeah, I will say, and I think, and I have this in the book. I have one of the people I interviewed for the book talked about like how much she would love if people just like dropped by. And there's a part of me that is like, yes, Absolutely. And then there's another part of me that is like, oh my God, that sounds terrible. So I write about this. This is one of the probably the most instructional parts of the book, and I'm happy if people just like totally steal this and apply it to their own lives. I created this thing, and I cannot wait to get back to it, called Drop By Dinner. And because I was like, I need to create a boundaried time where it's okay for me that people drop by. So I started this thing called Drop By Dinner. It was for folks to like, and I was very specific about who they were too, because I'm like, not everybody can drop by. And if you're dropping by, like, don't bring anybody with you, because I don't want random people in my house. Because it was also, I'm like, I'm trying to be more vulnerable. I'm not gonna clean up. Like, my house might be a whole ass mess. I might not have taken a shower, like, so it really has to be people who I feel comfortable, or I'm trying to be comfortable with, like being in my home when I'm not like put together, right? And part of the point was to create some of that intimacy. So it was, I created a window of time. People could drop by. If they were going to come by, then like, I will feed you whatever I'm feeding like everybody else, but like also bring something. And like, don't leave my house a mess. That was the other thing, is that like, don't come over, dirty my dishes, and then go away. I was like, you can't do that. If you come over, you have to like, you have to be in my home. You have to be of my home, because you're not actually like, I'm not hosting, and you're not a guest. Like, you're coming in to like be family with me. And it's like one of my favorite things ever that I've ever done. And I like deeply miss it. And I cannot wait until I can have people back in my house.
And in that way, it's so interesting, right? I mean, I think this relates to a lot of things you're saying. And from the beginning, I come from, as many know, in this community, but for those who don't, I'm from Turkey, and we actually had a totally drop by culture. And perhaps when it came to America to escape, I'm joking, but it was great. It's like at any point, people close from different generations could come by. But I'm actually been witnessing more and more over the past few decades that we're shying away from that. So there's kind of like it's as if we're stepping towards and building towards something else, but perhaps we shouldn't. And kind of these conversations are really generative of so many different communities and so many different stories and so many different experiences, that I think focusing on, as you're saying, I really appreciate that, as Hanson just mentioned as well. Kind of you also highlighting again, not a blueprint, but a way for us to think about the very many practices we may have done. There's that historical element to it too.
And I feel like there's a way in which we can moderate, right? Like, we don't have to, it's not like an all or nothing thing. So one of the things I've also been doing is, I'm dropping by people's place, like during the pandemic, dropping by people's home, but not to see them. I'm just like putting something on their doorstep. Like, for birthdays, for sure, which is something like I never did before. Before, I would just like text a friend if it was their birthday. But now, if there's somebody who like lives, near me, I will like bring flowers by and put it on their, doorstep, and then like text them happy birthday and tell them to go outside. So I feel like there are these ways in which I'm like becoming better at some of my relationships and becoming more in some of my relationships because of the pandemic. And then I think the other thing about dropping by is, like, I would be totally, like, I have a friend who lives a few blocks away, and she will sometimes text me and be like, not right now, but like she texts me and be like, are you home? Can I come over? Right. And she's like totally cool if I'm like, no, you can't. Or sometimes I'll be like, yes, come, like, let's have some wine. It's usually like a Friday afternoon. And I love that. So there's like, it's the difference between just like showing up on my doorstep and then expecting that I'm going to entertain you versus being like, hey, it's still spontaneous, right? It's like, hey, I'm free right now. Does this work for you? And I appreciate the like modification of kind of drop by culture in that way.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that. Thank you for raising that. And we actually got a great question in the chat. It's like we thought we should raise right now from Heather. It said, reading your book and your descriptions of relationships, I had the painful realization that not only do I not currently have relationships like those described, but I'd never had them in my life and had them. So how does one begin to build those kinds of close connections with others with no previous experience or model? It seems like it is something that we've forgotten over time. How can we do it?
So I think, part of why I wrote the book is because I wanted more of us to have models. So, lean on that. And I also think there is something, and I don't know like what Heather's background is, but I feel like there are models someplace in your history, whether it is how your family of origin was in relationship with other people. It might have been your grandparents. It could have been like, you know, some neighbor you had who wasn't like everybody else. So I think finding those places, or it's that you have relationships in your life right now where those people have those kinds of relationships with other people, but not with you. And then I think it's really about like, this requires, when we don't have these kinds of connections with people, or when we want to deepen them, it requires a lot of vulnerability and bravery. And there's just no getting around that. And for me, it has been talking to people, and I'm not just like, hey, can we be family with each other? I usually am. I'm like, so I've been thinking about something that I want more of in my life. It's really I'll say like, it's really uncomfortable for me to like bring this up, but I want to talk to you about it. I love you, and I would like to have a deeper relationship with you. And I try to think a little bit about like some things that I might want more of, and not just for like from them, but like for us collectively. And so, you know, I feel like so many people are also looking for this. So like you shoot your shot with one person and they're like, and awkward or whatever, maybe that's not where it's going to go. But I think partly we just have to like try to do this more and more. And I think frankly, for people who, and some people will say yes, even though they mean no, because they have a hard time figuring out how to say no, right? Because it's not the same as somebody like, you know, asking you out on a date. We don't have a practice of like rejecting somebody's overture of friendship. So just know that there will be lots of awkwardness, and that's okay. And I think you can just say that too when you have the conversations. And then I think like part of it is about like really trusting your instinct. Oh, I know what I was going to say. But the other thing is that, you know, for the folks who are not interested, right, in deepening the relationship, like that gives you really good information. It tells you, it does clarify for you what those relationships are. And then you can be like, oh, okay, that's what this is. I don't need to worry about that. And then you continue to look for places in your life where you can have something that is more intimate and deeper and more vulnerable for you. And I will just say, like, it's not like you can go do this in a year. It's really something that takes time. Like the community that I have built over like decades. And so this is, you know, and it shifts and morphs, and there are people who I was close to 10 years ago who I'm not close to now. And they're, you know, I have made like good friends during the pandemic with people who I've never met in person. So I feel like part of it is just about like being open to those relationships coming into your life, or the ones that you have deepening too. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, we're hearing so many comments. Also, thank you all for your thoughtful deliberations. And I think this conversation is already making us all think about it. The role of maybe spontaneity is one thing I'm seeing, but then also in kind of making maybe space for it for some of us, like but then also, as you also just mentioned, commitment, right? I mean, it's again, I think we somehow shrank our commitments, and imagine that we talk about, and not just because we're a communication program, but it is that we do not communicate with everyone, and that's so so interesting, and something that we have to definitely overcome and think about collectively in our own contexts. Something else that perhaps I thought, and I started thinking about, thanks again to the many stories and examples in your book, and that relates to our moment, and not just, again, a moment that's an inequitable experience of a pandemic, because not everyone's having the same experience of the pandemic at this moment, but also everyday acts of overt racism. Every single day we hear about as some community impacted, but not just subtle, but very overt, violent acts of racism. And it's a very tumultuous moment and intersecting at any moment, any given day, as you said in the beginning. So resilience is another thread that's in your book. That's, I think, something we should be thinking about in this moment. And I think there's also a gap in that. So you mentioned political scientist Daniel Aldrich's concept and deliberations on the notion of deliberation, resilience in your book. And I wanted you to maybe discuss that a little bit, because you want us to remember kind of that, and this is a part of the work, is resilience is not a singular act, even though often, I don't know, my mental image when I close my eyes and hear the word is a solitude, or is more loneliness than collectiveness. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how can we reimagine resilience and rethink it?
Yeah, right. We think of resilience as like individuals being resilient. And even if we're talking about a community's resilience, it's kind of like imagined as if it's like a whole bunch of individuals being resilient. But I think that, and that's not true, but my resilience largely depends on what what kinds of like mental load or burden or whatever I'm dealing with. And those things shift depending on what the people around me are picking up, right? So it is not a like, something that I'm just like bringing up deep in my soul and like creating. It absolutely has to do with like, how am I being supported by other people? So resilience sometimes is a thing that we pay for, right? So I have an assistant who helps manage my time and responds to requests and keeps track of things. And the mental load that I've transferred to her allows me either to handle more things that come my way, or just to have more like ease and rest, which builds my resilience. But obviously, like, they can operate in relationships. So when someone is experiencing hardship, and we bring them dinner or take care of their kids or whatever, cover them at work, we're creating, we're removing some of the things that they have to think about and worry about, so that they have more spaciousness to experience the trauma that they're experiencing. I mean, in many ways, like, resilience in that way, right, when it's collective, is the thing that prevents trauma, right? Like, trauma is when our system is overloaded and can't really process what's happening. And if we can reduce the load on people's systems, then they're able to process hardship and don't end up with, PTSD from whatever. So I think part of it is about, it's this leap of faith we really have to take in understanding this kind of alchemy that gets created when we're in communities with each other. And that when, there's that trust exercise where everybody is like in a circle and you all have like, your right shoulder in and you sit down, right? Everyone is being held and everyone is holding. And in real life, it's not as if like in that circle, right? Like, some people are stronger, some people are smaller, right? It's not that like you have everybody in there is like of equal size and strength. It is just like that the physics of all of that, right, allows everybody to be held up. And that's how it works when I think about like how we build resilience, how we practice resilience with each other, is that we have to trust that, like, I'm helping this person over here and this person over here is helping me. So it's not even about like a reciprocal relationship. It is about like, how do we create these webs and networks with each other so that everyone is being held and everyone is holding. And there are different times in your life when you're going to need more holding, and then there are times in your life when you have more capacity to hold others. That's how I think about what resilience looks like.
That is such a brilliant visual as well, because everybody brings their own strength and their own individuality, uniqueness to that collective. And in the end, we need each one of them to do that, but it's specific to them as well. So that's really nice. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. And I feel like I want to pull back a little bit to kind of like how this shows up when it comes to systemic oppression. So, for example, in many straight relationships, both people, like, married couples, right? Both people will be doing paid labor, but women end up doing more household labor. So they end up, and there's no mutuality there. It is that, like, they just have more burden. So they're relieving some burden from their male partners, but there's not some kind of reciprocation that's happening there. It's not mutual. And when we think about that on a societal level, right, people who hold privilege and power are extracting resources from people who don't hold privilege and power, and they can use their, usually financial capital to make their lives easier, but there's a group of people who are not benefiting from that. So what we have, like, in our society, right, is a group of people who hold resources that allow them to be more resilient, right? They can, if they get sick, they can pay for doctors. If, like, there's an earthquake, they can pay to have their house rebuilt. They are paying for like all the stuff that they need, right? They can manage both kind of basic needs, but also anytime there's a crisis or emergency, they have resources, money to pay for those things. And then there's a group of people who they are taking resources from, right, through their labor, through extraction, who then don't have the things that they need. So that imbalance is part, like, we do not have a resilient, America's not a resilient country because of that imbalance. I would say that, like, once we have equity, once we have justice, we actually create resilience for everyone.
That's a great segue to a question we received about the systemic nature of some of this inequity and what we can do about it from a public policy point of view. The question is how we can extrapolate from the examples and how we show up and apply them to citizen engagement around the political process, given that so many of the larger systemic issues the book addresses require political action to change. So there's a lot of individual things we can do, but there's obviously the system's got to change. How do we make that happen?
I mean, everyone should have a political home. And by that, I do not mean the Democrats or the Republicans. I mean that in your community, there are people who are organized to build the future that we need and or dismantle the systems of oppression that we're contending with. Today is Transgender Day of Visibility, for example. There is a group in Arkansas called Reconcile Arkansas. It's a mutual aid collective, and they have gotten together to support, I think primarily to support parents of transgender and queer kids as their government is attacking parents' ability to like access medical care for their children. I don't live in Arkansas. I don't have a transgender child, but I know that the legislation that the Arkansas General Assembly is trying to pass is harmful to these children. And I believe, because if COVID has showed us anything, it is that we are connected, because a virus does not travel around the globe in a matter of weeks if we are not all deeply connected. So those babies in Arkansas who are having grown-ass people, elected officials, attack their very existence matter to me. So today, one of the things I'm doing is amplifying and trying to support those families. So, that's not my my regular political home, but there is no lack of ways for us to mobilize ourselves and to get involved. So the problem is never like, where do I plug in? What should I do? That's not a question. It really is about how do I figure out how to prioritize, because there are so many ways in which we could plug in. And for that, I feel like we really have to think about like, well, what am I, like, what really resonates for me? What can I sustain? Right. I care about pandas. Right. But like, am I going to continually engage with an organization that's trying to save pandas? Probably not. So I'm trying to find the places where I feel that I resonate. I also, for me, it's important that I am engaging both in places where I feel like I am experience oppression. So there's work that I do with Black women, right? On behalf of Black women in relationship with Black women. And then I'm also like, well, where do I hold power, right? So I'm able-bodied and I'm a cisgendered person. So I feel like I also want to be doing work where I am using my power and privilege to support people who don't have the privileges that our society gives me because I'm an able-bodied cisgendered person. Those are my criteria for like how I get involved. So we all have, you can throw a rock and find a place that like would benefit from your engagement. That's not an issue. I think one of our challenges is, I'm getting a little ranty because I got all excited. One of our challenges is, especially, I'm assuming most of y'all are progressive, is that on the left, we think small. So when I started doing guaranteed income work, there was a project that I was doing, but because I was one of like 4 Black people in the country talking about guaranteed income, I ended up on a lot of panels. And somebody in the audience would always be like, but what about housing? But what about school? But what about, and I'm like, who told you that you have to choose? Who said, are the Republicans your daddy? Did they say you can't have all these things, you have to choose? No, they're not in charge of us. We can have all the things. We can have guaranteed housing. We can have guaranteed healthcare. We can have guaranteed income. We can have actual like good we can have free college. We used to have free college, y'all. My old boss of mine went to UC Berkeley and it was free. We can have those things. You know why? Because we are the wealthiest nation on the planet. We can have whatever the hell we want. It is never a question of can we afford it? It is a question of will. And we have to get out of our own ways and stop believing whatever narrative we've been told that we can only have one good thing. We can have all the good things.
And it's no surprise in that way for those who will read the book or who have read the book that it ends in hope. I think that embeddedness in hope was a surprise because, of course, there is so many, right? As the question from our community, Hanson just shared, the systemic problems are big. But then there is this kind of imagination around hope that perhaps we're restricting. So I just want to read the kind of a few sentences and maybe give it to you just to say a few final words about that end and that hope. You write, I know that the way to create the world we want and the one we owe those who come after us is only something that can be achieved in a community. I'm excited by a future in which all of us is cared for and loved so deeply that we give freely of ourselves to others because we are fully full and fully fed, and we know that our well-being is dependent on the well-being of those around us. It reads like it was written in this moment, although I want to remind that Mia wrote this book before. Making masses of the brilliance of this book for me. But I just want to kind of maybe end on that note and ask maybe a few more sentences from you. You end in hope. And I just want to acknowledge that and maybe hear from you why that ending.
Yeah, I get asked a lot about my hopefulness. And the like easy answer that I used to give is that like I'm constitutionally an optimist. So that's why. But the fact is, I actually believe that hope is the most logical feeling that I could have. Hope is the most logical approach that I could have. Because the things that I hope for, right? When I envision the world that I want, I'm like, it is born of things that I know all of us want. Even the misled, self-hating people who we became like deeply aware of during the Trump presidency. all those folks want to be loved, want to be safe, want to belong, want to be seen and known, want to be accepted. That's just who we are as human beings. Those folks have been tremendously misled about how you get to that place, and believe that in order for them to have the things they want, other people can't have what they need. My vision is about all of us. Now, I'm not here fighting for them. Like, I don't really try to mess with people who don't actually fundamentally believe I'm a whole human being. But I know that the world that I envision benefits everybody, including them. And because I know that those are the things we all want, and because I believe that human beings are fundamentally good, and I don't mean necessarily moral, but I mean that we want to be connected, we want to be whole, we want to be healed, we want to be loved, and we want to love other people, right? We want to be in connection. I'm like, oh, like that's who we are. So this is just, my hope is that we will actually allow ourselves to be us. And I don't see how else that would go. And then, like, you know, on a bad day, I'm like, well, shit, like I could either give up and, you know, I don't know, become a computer programmer and drink in the afternoons, and I don't know what people who don't have hope do, but like I could give up and be like, fuck it, you know, I'm out of here, I'm gonna go live my life. I could do that, but that sounds terrible and boring and sad. So hope is also just like, I'm like, that's how I get through my days when it's hard. I'm like, okay, this is today, tomorrow will be something else. And I believe in us. Fundamentally, I believe in us.
That was the most pleasant punch in the gut I've ever had. That was incredible. you really showed up. Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you for that. I love, one of our comments said, it's not pie. You know, we can all have it, right? So it's really great. It's really wonderfully said.
We can have multiple pies. I happen to love pie. But yes, we can have many pies. We don't each got to get a slice. There are infinite pies. That's my future, the land of infinite pies.
Great way to end. Akin, take us home.
Yeah, I just want to, I was inspired and went up and down when I was reading your book, Mia, about how we can show up, but also how we can reclaim things that we're not even maybe connected in time, but we should. And hearing you today added a new layer of inspiration that I was not, I could not imagine, and I can thanks to you. And I know that that was the sentiment, because I could, all our comments already points to us thinking about something in our world, something to do, and then also to think about it in this hopeful, systemically hopeful maybe manner, where we're collaborating and where we're reminding ourselves that we are there together, in different ways, but for each other, and for the type of kind of better future that we all aspire for.